So a man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard. And he came looking at the fruit, or looking for the fruit, and he found none. So the master says to the gardener, see here, for 3 years I've come, there's no fruit. Cut it down. It's wasting the soil that it's on. But the gardener says, hold on a minute, dear master. Sir, he says, just give it 1 more year. I'll plant some manure around it, fertilize it. If it doesn't come back in a year, you can cut it down. 20 years ago, I went to law school in Macon, Georgia, as some of you may know. And we lived in this small little house, and the neighbor said to me, my brother-in-law used to live there, and he had this great garden. He goes, why don't you put in a garden? And I said, well, I'm from the sandy soil of Florida. I never put a garden in my life. I don't know what I'm doing. He goes, it's easy. You just dig up the grass that has covered this garden, and you till it, and you put in new soil, and you'll have a great garden there. So my garden was probably that big. So I had like 5 or 6 rows of where I was going to plant my vegetables. So then I said, so what do I plant? And he said, I have one suggestion for you though. Tomatoes. If you get tomatoes, don't grow them from seed. I have some little plants that I grew over the winter, because a lot of these people are really into gardening. They grow it in their greenhouse when it's cold. And so then he had little plants, and he brought over 7 little tomato plants. He says if you grow them from seed, it takes forever. By the time the summer heat comes, they're just burned out. They've never matured. So I said, well, okay, great. I appreciate anything you do. He said, I'll be over next weekend. Sure enough, early in the morning, he shows up with his pickup truck, this time full of more rich dirt and mulch that he had kind of built up over the winter and that. And this time he has post hole diggers, and he has wheelbarrows. So he pulls up to where the garden is, that's all tilled now, and he says, for tomatoes, you can't just put them in the ground. Our soil here is that rich Georgia clay, that red clay that everybody knows about. It's real hard. And if you put these in the ground, they'll just die. There's no room for their roots to grow. You have to dig these out with post holes. He said, we're not just going to build, we're not just going to dig, a foot deep. He dug as far deep as a 50-gallon drum would be. So these holes are like that big, and 3 feet deep. Finally, we take those tomato plants and place them in the ground. So they're, the plants are this big and the holes are like that big. And then the final step is he brought over this chicken wire. And we unwrapped it, and he made cages that were 4 foot high, but as big as a 50-gallon drum. Okay? So I have these little plants, and I have these huge cages. And I said to him, are you sure we need such big cages? He goes, those plants grow right. They will fill those cages and more. They'll overflow. And I went, I didn't really believe him, but I went, okay. Because he had been, straight up with me all along. So sure enough, he said, you got to water it, and he kind of gave me ideas and fertilizing, those type of things. So the next week or so, I'm out there every day. I'm watering and I'm looking, and I'm, nothing's happening, and the tomato plants really aren't growing yet. And then I start seeing weeds come in, so I'm starting to pull weeds. And here I am in law school. I think I was in my 2nd year, so I had a little more time than first year, right? And I'm pulling weeds and I'm watering, and I'm putting in at least an hour or 2 every day after school. And I'm thinking to myself, God, this is a lot of hard work. When is it going to happen? But sure enough, like a week later, I start seeing the little sprouts. And I did put in cucumbers and pumpkins and beans and peas and carrots. And then I start seeing my little tomato plants jumping. Oh, and I also put in corn. Corn's an amazing thing, just like the tomatoes because it grows, once it starts growing, it grows really fast. So I started seeing kind of the fruit of my labors within a week. And then, you know, the next day and the next day. You can almost watch corn grow. It grows so fast. And those cucumber vines, they grow fast. And the fastest thing in the world are those pumpkin vines. Those things, they grow an inch a minute. I swear, those were across the yard. And I had a yard probably that went as far as where the school is. And those things were shooting out these long vines. And, you know, I was enjoying this because, again, I was a kid that never had a garden in my life. And one final thing is that not everything grew great. You could have a bean plant right here, and it was growing fine. It was going right up the fence, and I could see the little bean pods starting to happen. But you would have one right next to it, an inch away, and that thing wouldn't grow. It would grow maybe this high, whereas the others grew like 3 or 4 feet. And the same thing happened with one of the tomato plants. I had 6 of those plants that filled those chicken wires up to 4 feet and overflowing. They're going over the fence into the neighbor's yard. But one of them grew about halfway, never looked quite right. So, not everything grows, but a whole bunch of this stuff, a good 95%, grew very well. You know, and I'm out there every day watering and hoeing, you know, to get those weeds out between the plants. And I thought about ripping out that one tomato plant. And I thought about ripping out those little bean plants that they grow so well. But I thought, you know what? What am I going to replace it with? I mean, the season's now 3 months in. If I put something else in there, by the time it grows, it'll be too hot, it'll burn out in the summer. So there's something I learned doing that gardening. I learned it's a lot of hard work, a lot of preparation, a lot of weeding, a lot of hoeing, a lot of water. But I think the thing I learned the most was patience. And in today's gospel, what we see is this master coming in and saying, you know, I've had this fig tree for 3 years. You know, it's taken up room. It's not producing. Rip it out. It's taken up soil space. And it's kind of like a lot of managers. You know, we see it in baseball. We see it in football. You know, if the quarterback doesn't produce, he's gone maybe mid-season. Or we see it in business. You know, something doesn't work right away, we cut it off. But again, what I think this story is all about in the gospel is to have some patience. We see a God who's a patient gardener. He's the gardener in this story. He's the one that says, just hold on a year. Let's give it one more year. Let's fertilize this plant. And then if it doesn't work, cut it out. And I think what this is trying to tell us is, you know, yes, do the hard work. Take those weeds out of your soul, those things that are overcoming the other crops, but also fertilize those things in your soul that are doing good and will bear fruit. And be a little patient. Not every plant grows and matures along with the other ones. And that is the message today. God is the patient gardener, and He's also the example for us to, yes, weed, get rid of those things that aren't doing well for us, but if there's a good plant there, give it a little extra care. What I want us to do today is kind of look around, think about the people in our lives who need that extra fertilizer, that extra nurture.